rain was coming down so hard that the road had almost disappeared beneath a silver curtain when I saw the woman standing beside the stalled car. At first, I only noticed the blue poncho and the tiny bundle pressed against her chest. Then she turned her face toward my headlights, and my hands tightened around the steering wheel. It was Claire, my ex-wife, the woman I had once promised to love forever, the woman who had walked out of my life with tears in her eyes, and the last person I ever expected to see, standing alone in the middle of a storm with a baby in her arms. I nearly drove past her. Pride told me to keep going. Old wounds told me she was no longer my problem. But something stronger made me hit the brakes. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that sometimes God puts people back in our path for a reason, please take a moment to like this story, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose heart might need a reminder that compassion can change everything. I pulled onto the shoulder, jumped out into the rain, and ran toward her. Claire looked exhausted. Her dark hair was soaked against her face, and her hands trembled as she protected the baby beneath the blanket. She stared at me, as if she were looking at a ghost. The years between us seemed to vanish for one painful second. I noticed the small pink cheeks of the baby, the frightened little eyes, and the way Claire kept whispering that everything would be all right, even though her own face said she no longer believed it. Her car had died several miles from town, her phone was nearly out of power, and the nearest motel was full because of a storm-related evacuation. She had nowhere to go. I looked at the baby again and felt something inside me break open. I asked where her husband was, and Claire lowered her eyes. Her husband, Michael, had died 8 months earlier from a sudden heart condition. The baby in her arms was his daughter, Grace. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Michael had been the man Claire married after our divorce. I had spent years telling myself that I was happy for her. Even when I wasn't, I had built a new life in another town, convinced myself that the past belonged in the past, and buried every memory of our marriage beneath work and loneliness. But now Claire was standing in front of me, widowed and struggling to keep her baby warm, and all those old arguments suddenly seemed embarrassingly small. I opened the passenger door and told her to get inside. She hesitated, perhaps remembering all the reasons we had stopped trusting each other. Then thunder rolled across the sky, and Grace began to cry. Claire climbed in. During the drive, neither of us said much. The windshield wipers struggled against the rain while Grace slept against Claire's shoulder. I could hear Claire quietly crying beside me. I didn't ask why. Some pain doesn't need question. When we reached my house, I saw her looking at the dark windows, and remembered how different things had been when we lived together. There had been laughter in those rooms once, Sunday breakfasts, Christmas decorations, arguments over stupid things, dreams we had believed would last forever. We had loved each other deeply, but we had also been young, stubborn, and too proud to admit when we were hurting. By the time we understood what we were losing, our marriage had already fallen apart. Claire stood beneath the porch light, holding Grace close, and told me she would find somewhere else to go in the morning. She didn't want to make my life complicated. I looked at the baby, whose tiny fingers were curled around the edge of her blanket, and then at Claire. I told her she didn't need to explain anything. She needed a dry place for the night. My house was warm, but the garage had an old finished room attached to it with a small heater, a couch, and a bathroom. I had used it as storage for years. I opened the door, switched on the light, and watched Claire step inside. She looked around, then back at me with tears filling her eyes. In a voice barely louder than the rain, she said, "One night. The garage is fine." I nodded, and told her she could stay as long as she needed. That night, I lay awake listening to the storm. Around 2 inches the morning, I heard Grace crying. I walked into the garage room, and found Claire sitting on the couch, rocking her daughter, while tears ran silently down her cheeks. She admitted she was terrified. Michael had left her with memories, but very little money, and the house they had rented was being sold. She had been trying to find work while caring for an infant. but every rejection made her feel as though she was failing her daughter. I sat across from her and told her she wasn't failing, she was surviving. Then I said something I hadn't expected to say. You don't have to survive everything alone. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but something inside me had changed. I helped Claire get her car towed. I called an old friend, Andrew, who managed a local office and knew they were hiring. Claire applied for the position. Over the next few weeks, the garage room became a temporary home. Grace learned to smile whenever I entered the room. Claire began working during the day, and I watched her slowly regain the confidence grief had stolen from her. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We talked about it honestly for the first time. We admitted where we had hurt each other. We apologized without demanding anything in return. One evening, months later, I came home to find Claire sitting on the porch with Grace asleep in her arms. She told me she had finally saved enough money to rent a small apartment. I smiled because I knew it was good news, but my chest hurt anyway. She thanked me for stopping that night. I told her I hadn't stopped because I expected anything. I stopped because I couldn't leave someone I once loved, standing alone in the rain with a baby. Claire looked at me for a long moment and said that maybe God hadn't brought us back together to repeat the past. Maybe he had brought us back so we could finally become the people we had needed each other to be years ago. She moved into her apartment a few weeks later, but she never truly disappeared from my life. Grace still came over on Saturdays. Claire and I slowly learned how to be friends. Then something more fragile and beautiful than friendship. We didn't rush into promises. We didn't call it a second marriage. We simply chose each other again, one ordinary day at a time. Years later, whenever I hear rain striking the windows, I remember that night. I remember the woman beside the broken car, the baby in her arms, and the voice inside me telling me not to drive away. Sometimes, we think closing a door means the story is over. Sometimes it simply means life is waiting for the right storm to open it again. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people deserve second chances, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach someone who may need their own little reminder of hope. And before the story ends, I want you to leave a special comment. Kindness can change a life. Maybe someone reading your comment today needs to believe that. Because sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. Sometimes they arrive as a broken down car, a crying baby, a former love standing in the rain, and one simple decision not to drive away.